My dear, life had not been kind to me. My father's business had collapsed like a poorly baked cake, and the debt collectors were more regular visitors than our own relatives. My parents' faces were etched with a worry so deep, I thought they would never smile again. So, when the proposal came from the Albright family, it was like a miracle sent from heaven itself. They were one of the wealthiest families in the city, old money, the kind that whispers instead of shouts. And their son Kalen wanted to marry me. There was just one small thing. Kalen was a mute. A tragic accident years ago, they said, had stolen his voice. He was a ghost of a man, haunting his own luxurious life. I met him twice before the wedding, both times with his formidable mother, Mrs. Albright, present. He was beautiful. There's no other word for it. Tall, with hair the color of dark chocolate and eyes the shade of a stormy sea. But those eyes were empty. He would look at me, through me, and just nod or shake his head in response to questions. He never smiled. He never frowned. He was a stunning painting, not a man. Mrs. Albright did all the talking. Kalen cannot speak, but he understands everything, she would say, her voice like the sound of ice clinking in a glass. He needs a wife. A companion. Someone uncomplicated. In return, all your family's debts will be cleared, and you will want for nothing. It was a bargain. My freedom for my family's salvation. What could I do? I said yes. The wedding was a grand, silent affair. A cathedral filled with hundreds of the city's elite, all there to watch the poor girl marry the silent millionaire. I felt like a lamb going to the slaughter, dressed in white lace. Throughout the ceremony, Kalen held my hand. His grip was firm, but his skin was cold. He didn't look at me. He just went through the motions, a puppet on a string held by his mother. The reception was even worse. People pretended not to stare, but I felt their pitying glances like pinpricks. Such a brave girl. I heard one woman whisper. What a lonely life she'll have, murmured another. I smiled until my cheeks ached, making excuses for my husband. He's tired, I would say. It's been a long day for him. All the while my heart was a heavy stone in my chest. We finally left in a sleek black car, driving away from the city lights towards his sprawling, isolated estate. The car ride was suffocating in its silence. I stole glances at his profile, sharp and unreadable in the dim light. What was he thinking? Was he as miserable as I was? Did he feel anything at all? We arrived at a mansion that looked more like a museum. All cold marble, grand staircases, and portraits of stern-looking ancestors. An elderly butler named Silas, with eyes that saw too much, greeted us with a silent bow and led us to our bedroom. Our bedroom! The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Silas left, closing the heavy, ornate door with a soft click that echoed in the vast room. We were finally alone. Husband and wife. The air was thick with unspoken words. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, still in my wedding gown, unsure of what to do. I watched as Kalen walked to the window, his back to me, looking out at the dark, sprawling gardens. I took a deep, shaky breath. I had to say something. I had to break this silence. Kalen, I began, my voice a timid whisper. I know this is strange for both of us, but I promise I will try to be a good wife to you. He went perfectly still. Then slowly he turned around, and in that moment the man I thought I knew vanished. The emptiness in his stormy eyes was gone, replaced by a sharp, terrifying intensity. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. A small, dangerous smile played on his lips. He took a step towards me, then another, until he was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. He leaned in, his breath a warm caress against my ear. And then he spoke. His voice was not the broken, raspy thing I had imagined. It was low, deep, melodious, and laced with a chilling amusement. Thank you for your promise, Arya, he whispered, each word perfectly, clearly enunciated. But the first and most important rule of being my wife is this. You must never, ever tell a soul that I can speak. My dear, if you had been there, you would have frozen just like I did. For a full 10 seconds, I'm sure my heart stopped beating. The world tilted on its axis. The mute millionaire had a voice. And what a voice it was! It wrapped around me, smooth and dark like velvet, but it carried a threat that turned my bones to water. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my throat. You can talk?" I stammered, the words sounding stupid and obvious even to my own ears. That dangerous smile on his face widened. He looked alive. The painting had come to life and it was terrifying. "Quite well, as you can hear," he said, his tone conversational, as if we were discussing the weather and not his years of monumental deception. He walked over to a decanter and poured himself a glass of amber liquid, not offering me any. He took a slow sip, watching me over the rim of the glass. "But why?" I managed to ask, my mind reeling. "Your mother, everyone, they think you're mute." "That is the point, my dear wife," he said, the words dear wife sounding like a mockery. "It is a necessary performance. One that you are now a crucial part of." I felt a hot surge of anger mix with my fear. "A performance? You made me believe I was marrying a man who couldn't speak. You let me feel pity for you. You let me." I trailed off, the humiliation washing over me. "Pity is a powerful tool, Arya," he said calmly, setting his glass down. "It disarms people. It makes them lower their guard. No one suspects a mute man of having ambitions, of listening to secrets, of plotting. They say things in front of me they would never say to another living soul." He walked back towards me, and I stood my ground, this time my fists clenched. "And as for you, your genuine compassion and desperation made you the perfect candidate. No one would ever believe you were in on my secret because you weren't. Your shock, your confusion. It's all perfectly real." "In on what secret?" I cried out, frustration bubbling over. "What is this all about?" "That," he said, his voice dropping to a serious, commanding tone, "is not for you to know. Not yet. All you need to understand are the rules. Rule 1, as I said. My voice is our secret. To the world, especially to my mother and the staff, I am and will always be the silent, broken Kaylin. You will be my interpreter. You will learn to read my gestures, my looks. You will give voice to my will." The arrogance of it took my breath away. And why would I do that? Why wouldn't I walk out of this room right now and tell everyone the truth? He laughed, a soft, hollow sound. "And tell them what? That the poor, overwhelmed bride of the mute millionaire has started hearing voices? My mother would have you declared unstable and locked away in a heartbeat to protect the family name. And your family's debt? The money would be recalled. Your parents would be ruined. You have no proof, Arya. It's your word against the carefully constructed reality of the Albright family." The truth of his words hit me like a physical blow. He had me trapped. I had traded one cage for another, but this new one was far more sinister. It was a gilded cage with a wolf inside, not a silent lamb. "Rule 2, he continued, his stormy eyes locking with mine. "You do not leave this estate without my explicit permission. The outside world is a threat to our arrangement." "And what do I get in return for being your prisoner and your accomplice?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and despair. "You get the life you bargained for," he said simply. "Your family is safe. You live in luxury. And you get to stay alive." He let that last word hang in the air between us. Alive. It was a threat, clear and simple. He turned and walked towards the door that connected to his private study. "Get some sleep, Arya. We have a performance to give tomorrow at breakfast. Remember, not a word." He left me standing there in the middle of our wedding chamber, the beautiful, extravagant room now feeling like a prison cell. The man I had married was not a victim of a tragedy. He was the architect of a conspiracy. And I, the wife he had bought, was now his newest, most vulnerable pawn. The silence in the room was no longer empty. It was filled with the echo of his voice and the terrifying weight of his secrets. My new life had begun, and it was a beautiful, haunting lie. Understand. Oh, my dear, the morning after was a lesson in torture. I had barely slept a wink. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Kaylin's voice, that low, confident whisper that had shattered my world. When the sun finally rose, painting the room in a deceptively cheerful light, I felt like I was walking to my own execution. A maid brought in breakfast on a silver trolley, setting it up in the sitting area of our suite. A few minutes later, Mrs. Albright swept in, followed by the ever-silent Silas. She looked at me, then at Kalen, who was already seated, calmly reading a newspaper. He looked every bit the vacant, handsome man I had first met. "Good morning, Arya," Mrs. Albright said, her voice crisp. "I trust you slept well?" Her eyes were sharp, searching my face for any sign of distress. I forced a smile. My first performance. "Yes, thank you, Mrs. Albright." It was a lot to take in. "Of course," she said, sitting down. She turned to her son. "And you, Kalen? Did you rest?" Kalen didn't look up from his paper. He simply gave a small non-committal nod. This was it. My first test. "I think he's still a little tired from the festivities yesterday," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally high-pitched to my own ears. It was a beautiful wedding, but very overwhelming. Mrs. Albright's gaze lingered on me for a moment too long before she nodded. "Indeed." She then began discussing the household accounts with Silas, speaking freely in front of Kalen as if he were a piece of furniture. "And remember, Silas, the landscapers are not to touch the old rose garden on the west wing. It is to remain exactly as it is." I saw Kalen's knuckles whiten slightly where he held the newspaper. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible reaction, but I caught it. So the west wing rose garden was important. I filed that piece of information away, a tiny seed of knowledge in the vast, dark field of my ignorance. This became our new routine, a life of constant, exhausting performance. I became Kalen's voice. At dinner, I would say, "Kalen prefers the wine from the southern vineyard," when he simply glanced at a particular bottle. During meetings with his business managers, who would present reports to a silent Kalen while I sat beside him, I would interpret his subtle cues. "My husband feels the projections for the quarterly earnings are too optimistic," I would say, after he had tapped his finger twice on the table. It was terrifying how easily he manipulated everyone through me. He was a master puppeteer and I was his puppet. But slowly something else began to happen. I started to see things. I noticed how Silas's eyes would sometimes linger on Kalen with a look that wasn't just servitude, but something closer to vigilance. I saw the way Mrs. Albright would sometimes watch her son with a mixture of fear and resentment, not a mother's love. One afternoon, I was in the library trying to find a book to distract myself from the madness of my life. I heard hushed voices in the next aisle. It was Mrs. Albright and Silas. "Are you certain he hasn't spoken to her?" Mrs. Albright's voice was tense. "Quite certain, madam," Silas replied. "I have been watching closely. She seems genuinely confused by his silence. She is no threat." "He is getting reckless, Silas. This marriage was a risk. We must be prepared. If he breaks his silence, if he ever speaks of what happened." "He won't, madam. The consequences are too grave. He knows what is at stake." My blood ran cold. If he ever speaks of what happened, what had happened? What was the terrible secret that was so powerful it had forced a man to pretend to be mute for years? And what were the grave consequences? That night, during our silent, tense dinner, I looked at Kalen not as my captor, but as a fellow prisoner. He was trapped in this charade just as much as I was, albeit by his own design. The enemy of my enemy. I knew I couldn't trust him, but perhaps I could understand him. I decided to break one of his rules just a little. When we were back in our room, I didn't wait for him to speak. I turned to him, my heart pounding. "Your mother and Silas are afraid of you," I said quietly. He froze, his back to me. The silence that followed was different from all the others. It was charged, dangerous. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "I heard them talking in the library. They're afraid you'll speak. They're afraid of what you might say." "What happened, Kalen? What are they so afraid of?" He turned slowly. The storm in his eyes was now a hurricane. For the first time, I saw a crack in his cool, controlled facade. I saw raw, unadulterated pain. "You listen to me," he snarled, striding forward and grabbing my arm, not hard enough to hurt, but with enough force to make his point. "You will stop listening at doors. You will stop asking questions. That path leads to a place you do not want to go. Do you understand?" I yanked my arm away. "No, I don't understand. I'm living in this nightmare with you. I deserve to know why." He leaned in, his face inches from mine. "What you deserve, Arya, is to be safe. And the only way you stay safe is by staying ignorant. Now drop it." He stormed into his study and locked the door, leaving me alone and shaking. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was determined. He had confirmed it. There was a secret, a dangerous one, and I was no longer just a pawn. I was a player, and I was going to find out what it was. My dear, have you ever felt a truth so heavy in the air you could almost taste it? That's how the mansion felt after my confrontation with Kalen. The air was thick with secrets, and I was determined to swallow them whole. His warning had only made me more curious. Fear is a powerful motivator, but so is the desperate need to understand the prison you're in. His command to stay ignorant was like a red flag to a bull. I started paying even closer attention. I noticed that Silas carried a single old-fashioned brass key on a chain that he never seemed to use. I noticed that the staff, under strict instructions from Mrs. Albright, never went to the west wing of the mansion. They would clean right up to the large, ornate door that separated it from the rest of the house, but never beyond. The old rose garden was directly below the windows of that forbidden wing. Kalen had become even more distant, spending hours locked in his study. I knew he was watching me, waiting to see if I would obey. I had to be careful, smarter than them all. My opportunity came a week later. Mrs. Albright announced she was leaving for a 2-day charity event in the city. The moment her car disappeared down the drive, the atmosphere in the house shifted. It was as if a heavy blanket had been lifted. Kalen retreated to his study, and Silas, for the first time, seemed distracted. This was my chance. The West Wing. I waited until deep in the night, when the house was steeped in a silence so profound I could hear my own heartbeat. I slipped out of my room, a small flashlight in my hand. The long dark corridors felt like a journey into the belly of a beast. The portraits of the Albright ancestors seemed to watch me with disapproving eyes as I crept past. I reached the large door to the west wing. It was locked, of course. I remembered Silas's key. But I had noticed something else. The lock was old and the door, warped with age, had a slight gap at the top. I saw a glint of metal. Using a hairpin, I managed, after several nerve-wracking minutes, to push the key out of the lock. It fell to the other side with a soft thud. Chai! I was stuck. Frustrated, I was about to turn back when I remembered the rose garden. Maybe there was an external entrance. I made my way down to the ground floor and out a side door into the cold night air. The overgrown rose garden was a tangle of thorns and shadows, eerily beautiful under the moonlight. And there, almost completely hidden by a monstrous thorny bush, was a French door. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of dust and disuse. I shone my flashlight around. I was in a sitting room frozen in time. The furniture was covered in white sheets, like a gathering of ghosts. But it wasn't abandoned. It was preserved. A book lay open on a side table, a delicate layer of dust on its pages. A half-finished cup of tea, now moldy, sat on a coaster. It was as if someone had left in the middle of their life and never returned. I moved further in, my light beam dancing over portraits. One in particular caught my eye. It was a young woman with a radiant smile and kind eyes. Kalen's eyes. She was beautiful, with a warmth that was absent from every other portrait in this cold house. Who was she? I entered what must have been a bedroom. This one was even more personal. Perfume bottles sat on a vanity, and a silk robe was draped over a chair. And on the nightstand, in a simple silver frame, was a photograph. It was the same woman from the portrait, her arms wrapped around a younger, smiling Kalen. He looked happy, carefree, his eyes full of light. This was the Kalen I had never known. The man he was before the tragedy. My light fell on a small leather-bound journal on the floor, partially tucked under the bed. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I opened it to a random page. The handwriting was elegant, flowing. September 12th. Kalen and I argued again today. He is so stubborn, just like his father. He wants to sell the company, break from his mother's control. Eleanor is furious. She said things, terrible things. She said she would rather see the company burn than see him defy her. The tension in this house is suffocating. Sometimes I'm afraid of what she might be capable of. Eleanor. Mrs. Albright. The writer was clearly close to Kaylin. A girlfriend? A lover? I flipped to the last written page. The entry was short, the handwriting shaky. He knows. Kaylin knows the truth. Everything is unraveling. I have to tell him everything tonight. I'm so afraid. If Eleanor finds out. The entry ended there. Abruptly. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the figure in the doorway. It was Kaylin. His face was a mask of fury and something else, sheer, unadulterated terror. I told you not to come here, he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. Who is she, Kaylin? I asked, holding up the journal, my own fear replaced by a desperate need for answers. What truth did you know? What did your mother do? He strode across the room and snatched the journal from my hands, his eyes blazing. Her name was Alara, he said, his voice raw with a grief so profound it filled the entire room. She wasn't just my lover. She was my wife. And my mother killed her.
Understand.
My dear, in that dusty, forgotten room the world stopped. The pieces of the puzzle, all the strange looks, the fear, the silence suddenly slammed together with a force that stole my breath. Kaylin's wife. Murdered. By his own mother. He sank onto the dusty, sheet-covered bed. The journal clutched in his hands like a lifeline. The furious, controlled man was gone. In his place was a broken boy, drowning in a decade of grief. It was all about control, he began, his voice a hollow whisper. The money, the company, the Albright name. My father died when I was young, and my mother, Eleanor, she built an empire. And I was her heir. But I didn't want it. I fell in love with Alara, an artist with no fortune, no name. She was my sunlight. We married in secret. He looked around the room, his eyes seeing a different time. When my mother found out, she was enraged. She said Alara was a gold digger, that she would destroy our family's legacy. We had a huge fight. Alara wrote about it in her journal. My mother threatened her. The next day, Alara was found dead in the rose garden. A tragic accident, they said. A fall from this very balcony. He looked up at me, his stormy eyes filled with tears. But I knew. I found a piece of her scarf, caught on a bush far from where she fell. I confronted my mother. And she didn't deny it. She told me that she had pushed her. She said she did it to protect me, to protect our family from a scheming nobody. And then she gave me an ultimatum. I could barely breathe. The silence, I whispered. He nodded. If I ever spoke of what I knew, if I ever went to the police, she would destroy Alara's memory. She had powerful friends. She would fabricate evidence, paint Alara as unstable, a drug addict. The world would remember her as a pathetic girl who killed herself, and my testimony would be seen as the ravings of a grief-stricken man. But if I stayed silent, if I played the part of the heartbroken, mute son, shattered by the accidental death of his secret lover, then Alara's memory would remain pure. My silence was the price for her dignity in death. My heart ached for him. All these years he had lived in this gilded cage, his voice shackled not by a physical ailment, but by a mother's monstrous love and a blackmail of the most despicable kind. He wasn't a villain. He was the primary victim. But why marry me? I asked, my voice soft. A few reasons, he admitted. My mother was pressuring me to marry a woman of her choosing, to produce an heir and solidify her legacy. I needed a wife to stop her constant scheming. But more than that, I was tired. After years of silence, I was starting to crack. I needed an ally, someone from the outside. When I learned of your family's situation, I saw your strength, your resilience. I took a gamble that you were someone who could handle the truth. And I was right. He looked at me, truly vulnerable for the first time. The moment I spoke to you on our wedding night, it was a test. I was handing you a weapon, my secret. I was giving you the power to destroy me, to destroy my mother. And in doing so, I was setting myself free from the absolute isolation. I was desperate for a connection, Arya. Even if it was built on a lie. Everything made sense now. The performance, the rules, the constant vigilance. We were two prisoners in the same jail, and his mother was the warden. So what do we do now? I asked, moving to sit beside him. For years I've been gathering evidence, he said, a new determined light in his eyes. Silas was my father's loyal butler. He suspects the truth, but he's terrified of my mother. I have the journal. I have financial records showing payments my mother made to cover her tracks. But it wasn't enough. I needed a witness. Someone credible. He looked at me and I understood. I was that witness. I was the one who could corroborate his story, who could tell the world about the secret conversations, the fear in Mrs. Albright's eyes, the preserved room. We have to be smart, I said, my mind already racing. We need to get that key from Silas. We need to secure this journal and all your evidence somewhere safe. A slow, real smile touched Kalen's lips for the first time. It transformed his face. We. I took his hand. It was warm this time. We, I said firmly. You're not alone anymore. The plan unfolded over the next few days. We played our parts perfectly, the silent husband and his devoted, interpreting wife. But now it was a shared mission. I worked on Silas, appealing to his loyalty to Kalen's late father, showing him kindness he never received from Eleanor. Slowly he began to soften. The final piece fell into place when Mrs. Albright returned. She called us into her private parlor for tea. She was in a triumphant mood, having secured a new business deal. It's good to see you looking so well, Arya, she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. You've settled in nicely. Thank you, Eleanor, I said, deliberately using her first name. I saw Kalen tense beside me. It's amazing what you can learn about a house when you explore it. Her smile tightened. I hope you haven't been disturbing any of the closed-off areas. They are closed for a reason. Oh, I know the reason, I said, my voice steady. I looked directly at her. I know about Alara. The room went deathly quiet. The cup in her hand trembled, clinking against the saucer. I don't know what you're talking about. Kalen finally spoke, his voice clear and strong, ringing through the room after years of silence. Yes, Mother. You do. The look on her face was one of pure, undiluted horror. She stared at her son, at his speaking, accusing mouth, as if she were seeing a ghost. It's over, Mother, Kalen said, getting to his feet. Silas has given me the key. The journal and all the evidence are now with my lawyers. The police will be here any moment. She collapsed back into her chair, all her formidable composure shattered. She was just a frightened old woman who had done a terrible, terrible thing. As we walked out of the parlor, hand in hand, the sound of sirens grew in the distance. The silence of the Albright mansion was finally being broken, not by a whisper, but by the sound of justice and a chain, 10 years in the making, finally snapping. Kalen was free. And I was no longer a prisoner in a gilded cage. I was his partner, his wife, and our story, our real story, was just beginning.